It's the Video Jungle Podcast. Find your fascinating.
Welcome to the Video Jungle Podcast. I am Artie Gold. This is Justin Andrews.
A.K.A. J-Man, A.K.A. J-Rock, A.K.A. Justin, A.K.A. You get the idea.
Yeah, these are all the nicknames our clients have given you, by the way. Those are not made up. So we have clients say, is the J-Man there?
That's how I refer to myself most of the time. The J-Man, coming at you.
And today we're going to discuss something that we have a lot of experience in. That's the art of the interview. I'm not going to date myself by saying how many interviews I've done over the course of my career.
2.5 million
It's got to be up there. And I know you're probably trailing me just by a little now.
But I remember my very first interview when we started this company. I remember what that felt like. And it didn't feel so great.
The thing about the interview I always tell people is it looks a lot easier than when you're watching somebody do it, right? It just looks easy. You're just asking questions. But when you first get that microphone in your hand, or if somebody's laved up or boomed, and you start to ask questions, it gets very difficult in your mind very quickly, and you realize that there's an art form to interviewing.
It's something that actually takes a lot of practice and preparation to get great at it, because you're right. Like, people think you can just jot down a list of questions and you show up and you just ask those questions. But in my opinion, that's not the right way to do it, because it's not how you get the person that's being interviewed to say the most profound things possible. So we're going to share some tips and tricks that we've experienced and learned through the years of doing this, and mistakes we've made along the way, but things that will help anybody get the best sound bites possible from their interviewers. But before we even do that, what do you think is like the real value to the interview process?
So the value to the interview process for me has been, and will continue to be, especially on the corporate side of our business, is we're dealing with what we like to call real people, real stories. What that means is most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, we're not hiring actors to walk into these corporate environments. We're not hiring actors to pretend to be the CEO or the CMO.
Although we could do that.
We could do that, yes.
Yeah, no, not Tom Cruise. Denzel Washington would make a really good CEO.
But not Tom Cruise.
Not Tom Cruise.
Look, there's a small group of Hollywood professionals we want to work with. George Clooney, Brad Pitt.
Yeah, all great CEOs.
All great CEOs. But the bottom line is, it's real people, real stories. And what does that mean? That means that we're trying to find the most authentic response to a real answer, right? We don't want them to make it up, the answers. We want them to give us a natural response. So how do you get to that part?
And I think it goes into another thing that most companies, they talk about their people as being their greatest asset. Their people is what sort of drives their culture. And I think when people think about like product videos and that type of stuff, they often don't leverage their people nearly enough. Because if you have great people that you've invested in, why not give them a platform and a forum to make their voice heard and make sure it actually sounds like them and not some fancy script that was designed behind the scenes?
And I think my first piece of advice in the art of interviewing is preparation. I think you have to be prepared. And I'm not talking about, and we can talk a little bit about our different styles and the interview process of how you ask questions. But when I say be prepared, it's know what you're talking about before you show up. Sometimes you can't. I get that. Sometimes you're thrown to the wolves. Things happen. But the better you get at interviewing, it's still the same process. You just do it quicker. But when I mean be prepared, if you looked at my style of interviewing, which is very organic, I like to take you down a path, like to open you up to tell stories. Sometimes it seems like it's not connected, but I get to where I need you to get to because I want you to feel comfortable. But I never go into an interview without prepping the information, the list of questions, the deliverables that the client may want. And sometimes I even do research on the person I'm interviewing because we want to make that connection. Like, what college did they go to? Where did they have breakfast? Where do they live? What's their social security number?
Even more, where do you keep your money? Even more than that, to your point of like, the prep isn't just about the questions. It's really about what we're trying to get for the videos that we know we need to make. And more importantly, making sure we sound educated in our questions. As much as you could have an interview manuscript that says like a fancy industry term, a piece of jargon, if you don't understand what that means, then you're in trouble when you're conducting that interview. So for us, when we work with like pharmaceutical industry, healthcare, financial services companies, we can be in locations that are definitely very technical and above our knowledge
Yes.
in these specific industries.
But one of the mistakes I think what I see a lot of young interviewers do, you want to be knowledgeable and you want people to respect you. But, I think it's okay sometimes to stop and say, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Can you explain it to me? And I see a lot of young interviewers get tongue-tied and or get nervous because they get nervous if they don't know it. I'm at the point now, like you do as much research as you can in prep work, but I think it's okay to stop and tell somebody, hey, or ask somebody, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I actually don't understand that. We work in the financial and the pharma world. There's a lot of pharma stuff I don't know that I know
more
you do.
often, like what you're asking from the interviewer is to explain things often in terminology that somebody who isn't in industry, seasoned industry professional would understand. So as a third party walking into a lot of businesses, like you actually have an advantage in not knowing everything because you're going there sort of like a field trip and having that mindset of like, I'm going to learn something today when I have this conversation. That should be your mindset when you're walking in. You should be very prepared, but you should actually want to have good conversations with people and actually want to learn something.
And I think we have interviewed and will continue to interview different levels of people, correct? Like we expect a CEO to be fairly good on camera, be able to answer some stock questions. As you go lower down the list, there's a lot of employees / different people you interview that may not feel as comfortable on camera. And I think that's part of our goal too, right? The interviewer has to figure out very quickly how to make this a comfortable experience for people in a, let's be honest, not a comfortable world, right? These people are coming from their cubicle desks to a set that may have 3 cameras, a set of lights, and 9 people on it.
Yeah, and comfort even starts before the shoot, right? Like they're going to show up, there's going to be a shoot. But I think there are some things you can do to prep, and there's always like this debate of, do you give somebody all the questions? Do you give them everything in advance, or don't you in the prep?
Yeah, what's your
How do you make
answer on
someone
that,
feel
actually?
comfortable? It's always tricky because there are some people that, my preference is to give people information about what the intent of the interview is, what we're trying to make, maybe some samples around what good looks like, but not really to give them much in the way of questions because I don't like when people come in with scripts.
Yes.
Because now it's in their head that they need to say these certain things. And it's okay if they have like a few notes, but you don't want them to feel like they're presenting to you and they have to remember all these things. You want them to feel natural, organic, and have the emotion that comes with those responses because often it's how you say something, not just what you say that makes it powerful on video.
So coming in with pre-prepared notes and scripts is one of my, it's a pet peeve, but I understand why people do it. So my quick tip number 1 for this whole thing is when I see somebody come in with those notes, I have a small conversation to get them comfortable. Then I grab the notes and I say, I'm going to ask your questions based off of your notes.
Agreed.
And then it makes them feel good because then you're holding their notes, which makes it a lot easier. And to be honest with you, their answers is a great tool to figure out very quickly what they know and what they don't know.
It actually is a really good tip because it happens pretty frequently, especially in the corporate world where people do want to have some questions in advance and they type up notes in the Uber ride over or something like that. I agree that like you should take their notes and tell them that you're going to guide them through their notes. And at the very end, give them the opportunity to take a peek at their notes, see if they missed anything or one to re-say something, but don't leave it up to them to reference their notes. It's your job to interview them and guide them around it.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
Question. Can anybody find their fascinating?
100% of people can find their fascinating. Yes.
Is that a scientific fact?
The studies are in. We conducted a lot of research, spent way too much money determining that find your fascinating is a thing that humans can do.
And how many dentists approve of our find your fascinating?
4 out of 6.
And what are the other 2 doing right now?
They're
basically not dentists anymore, Justin.
Right.
So they don't
didn't
count.
know.
So
I
it's
didn't
really
know what
4
happened
out of
to
4
them.
dentists because they didn't understand the process, so they just didn't make it in this world. So if you want to make it in this world of creativity and finding your creative courage, you should go to findyourfascinating.com right now. We'll send Justin right into your office. We'll send our team into your office, and we will find your fascinating.
But not if you're a dentist.
But not if you're one of those other 2 dentists. They lost their chance. We are fortunate to have a company where we work with a lot of the same crew. Our DPs are really good. Our editors are solid. when you are working with a freelance DP or somebody that's not on your team, one of the pieces of advice I always, or one of my requests when I'm on set, is to tell the DP, if you notice, because, if you work on a crew, you'll notice, if the person being interviewed is a little nervous, I always say, hey, just start recording now, because part of the style is get them to talk. Before you know it, they're saying what you need to say. You don't want to miss it, especially if they're nervous. And then what ends up happening is you try to prep. See this a lot on set. You try to prep them. They're still nervous. And then you go, okay, action, roll.
Right.
But they're just too nervous to go. But if you do a pretty good job, and you've had a lot of success with getting them to talk right away as well. What are some of your tips on getting them to talk, and how do you calm the nerves down for somebody
I think it starts, again, it's one of those things that starts way in advance. Like, somebody should be prepared in the way of at least knowing you're showing up for this 30-minute block. Someone's going to be asking you questions. Like, they should know the general format of it. That helps. And then when they arrive, you should get in front of them, introduce yourself. Your crew should know to start rolling as soon as they sit or even before they sit in the chair. And you should just talk to them. And I like to say, ignore all the lights, ignore the cameras. This is honestly just a conversation that we're going to have. And I'm just getting to know you. So one thing that I sometimes do, and I've heard this before, is like to get audio levels, you can either just start talking or ask a funny question like, what'd you have for breakfast? And have just like some banter around that. But to that point of like just going and right off the bat, like making it about you and them and not about the camera, not about the lights, so that you're actually talking. And it's one of those things that when you ask a question, you have to nod and smile because they're engaging with you at that point. And I think this is where like the next tip comes in, and you'll be able to speak to this more, is just this idea of like, you're not asking the first question and then asking the second question, then asking the third question. No, you're actually actively listening. So if I ask you question 1 and you naturally start talking about something else, I need to piggyback off of that. And maybe I'm pulling question 10 on my list or this other thing that I need. Or maybe I'm just talking to you knowing that we're going to throw away this footage.
And this goes back to preparation, because I totally agree with that. There are times where you're just going to meet somebody very interesting, right? We had a corporate client. One of the guys ended up playing minor league baseball for the Tampa Bay Rays, right? So that's a very interesting topic. How did you end up in this world of corporate? And so we started talking about that. But as the interviewer, you have to remember you also have to get certain facts and things that you're trying to. And the hardest thing to do is stay on track. The only way to stay on track is that preparation, so that you can take the time to say, hey, I love that story you told, but we also need to get the culture video done. We need to get the topic of the day done. Going down that list, for me personally, when I say the list, let's say the client gives you a list of 10 questions you have to do. By prepping, you can kind of come up with your own flow, maybe add the questions in between that helps the segues. But do you feel like when you go down that list, doesn't it become very, very robotic?
It's way easier for an editor at times, but I don't think you get the best questions from doing that. And sometimes you're in a conversation mode, and I'll just kind of answer and talk to somebody after they said something, and they'll say, what's the question? Which is okay to me, because it's like, no, I was just commenting on what you said because it was interesting to me. Here's the next question. Like, sometimes it really should just turn into a conversation where you're talking to somebody that you've never met before, and it feels interesting to learn something they're saying, and you actually spark an organic question that gets them to be excited and emotional on camera, rather than just like you're asking a question that's next on your list, and they can tell that you're asking a question that's next on the list, and they're just...
Yeah, that's my favorite part. My favorite part about making this as conversational as possible is, if you read a book about this interview process or interviewing people, whether it's for a documentary or the corporate world, or you go to school for media, what do they always say? Don't ask an open-ended question, right? Don't ask a yes/no, because they're just going to close because they'll just say yes, no. But here's
sometimes
the thing.
that happens.
But sometimes that happens. But here's the thing, and when you get in that flow of the conversational interview that we're talking about, sometimes you can't even finish your question because they're ready to answer. And I love that moment where they're ready to answer halfway through an interview, where you can stop almost asking. You don't have to have that prepared 3-minute question that's top to bottom, perfectly eloquently stated. You basically say, hey, can you tell me? And they go, oh, I will tell you right now. I will tell you right now because I'm ready. I am on the same path of what you're trying to say. And it just makes it such a better interview, because those are the ones when you get back to post, they will feel better, they will sound better, they will look better.
And at the same time, it isn't all, again, just this conversational rapport that you build. as the producer, director, you do want to kind of script out and do a paper edit in advance in your head of, what is the type of soundbite that you're actually looking for. Because at the end of an interview, something that I like to do sometimes is, one, just ask them, is there anything that I missed in this that you wanted to cover? And then obviously, like, a client might be there. They might chime in with some additional questions. And sometimes you might have some pre-scripted things that you didn't exactly nail. And you say, like, I'm looking for a soundbite like this. Because the one flaw of a conversational interview sometimes is you end up with these very long-winded things. And as a producer, director, editor, in your head you need to ask them to restate something more simply. So a lot of times it's not just a one-and-done deal where you get a great comment. That's beautiful. It's going to look great in the edit room. But the reality is you need them to say it again, more concise. They need to weave certain language into it. Maybe they referred to the company as like they instead of we. Like sometimes you need to correct for those little things and you need to be listening, or you need to have a PA that's listening and helping to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, they missed this mark. It sounded great, but we need to have them say this filler comment.
And the art of the interview is as you get better doing that, you'll look better on set, you'll feel better. And that actually is a way to make the entire process as comfortable as possible, because the other thing that happens that's nice is as one person that's being interviewed leaves, they'll say, oh, this was easy. They made it so nice. They made it so comfortable. That's one of my favorite things that happens is when they say that, because you don't want them leaving going like, that was the worst experience of my life. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm going to go back to my desk and quit my job now. Like making that experience as crisp as you can make it is good for everybody.
Hey, have you heard of the internet?
I have heard of the internet, yes.
Well, maybe you haven't used it yet, but it's a thing where there's a browser and you type in stuff. And if you type findyourfascinating.com, that's the first step to learning about our process for helping businesses uncover their fascinating, brainstorm new ideas, and make some stuff happen, right?
That's the first step I would take. It's actually what I do even in our meetings.
Hey, have you heard of Netflix?
I have.
It's a website that helps you find movies and curate things that watch interesting stuff that you might like.
That's kind of what findyourfascinating.com is going to do too.
Nothing like that.
It's not even apples to apples.
No. Those are just two things that are cool.
That's nice. Not everybody's going to be great on camera, right? So you have to deal with that part as well. So at some point you have to cut an interview out. But here's the thing, for all the young producers out there, your corporate client is probably within reason going to want to use almost everybody you interview because they took the time to do it and they want to show. There's a reason
you should be able to
them.
get at least one good soundbite out of everybody.
And that's my point is you have to become good at the interview because this isn't your choice at some point to say, hey, we're just not going to use you. You have to get enough out of them to at least come up with a soundbite or two.
It can be painful when you're like 15 minutes into an interview that isn't going well.
Right.
And you can feel like the tension, and you're, as the producer director, throwing any notes that you have aside and saying, okay, what is this person passionate about? And I remember a big squid company we worked with many years ago, and it was family owned. We were interviewing the dad who'd been in this industry for 50 years. And when we were asking him sort of the questions about the business, he wasn't as excited. He just wasn't bringing like his passion for the industry. But the moment we started talking about the fishing boats, his eyes lit up and he almost became a different person. And it was like, thank God, we found the thing that got him to open up. And sometimes you're really pulling at straws, looking for the right comment, the right talking track that's going to get them excited. And then you might double back on some of the important questions that you need because their whole mindset shifted. They got out of their chair. They got a little bit excited, and it changes everything.
And that leads me to our team has heard this many times over because unfortunately, Justin, sometimes as me and you doing a lot of the interviews for our company, it becomes almost like a stand-up comedy routine, right? We do the same material in front of clients because it's like, what's what we do, right? We have our set.
I'll tickle people to get them to laugh. Everyone knows that.
But I say this story all the time to make people comfortable, which is, and feel free to steal it out there, but I say once you get to our set and the lights turn on, the camera turns on, we do our audio check, anybody that's sitting in front of that camera is going to lose half their IQ. So no matter how smart they are, all of a sudden you're dealing with half the IQ of that person, and then we're expecting them to answer questions.
It's a lot like
eloquently.
Will Ferrell in the movie Old School, where he blacks out on stage during the debate side. Like, that's what happens, and normally it goes well, but often a lot of people like walk away and they're like, I honestly don't remember anything that I just
I don't
said.
remember. Or they sometimes come back an hour later and said, that was really bad. Can I do it again? And or can I didn't want to say that. Don't use that.
There's sort of two tips in that like idea that I've sort of started to incorporate. So one thing I definitely tell people is like, listen, we are not a news station. We're not 60 Minutes. We're not here to interrogate
Good
you.
point.
We are on your team, okay? So we're here to make sure you look good. I might re-ask questions. I might do this. You're doing fine. We're just navigating where this is going to make sure you look and sound great. And then remembering, like even during this podcast right now, we can edit at any point. We can say, let's take a time out. Let's just talk about the soundbite that we want. The cameras are still rolling. They don't know that. But what are you trying to say, person that I'm interviewing?
Right.
Tell me what you're trying to say so I can understand a little bit better, and then I'll work up some questions for you. So sometimes if something's not going perfectly, it's okay to break the interview. It never feels good. I like getting in a flow, but sometimes you do have to say like, okay, let's actually like figure out what you're trying to say. Let's script some things out, and let's try this again.
I always say that these are going to be redundant. I probably am going to ask you this 3 times. Just keep answering it, because somewhere along the way I'll either get a really good beginning, a good middle, or a good end. But I just wasn't comfortable with the actual answer, but something is there, which is different than just stopping and re-asking the question sometimes. I find that makes them a little bit nervous, but I guess you just have to judge who you're talking to at that point. Like, for instance, we talked about the CEOs. Some of them have been trained in public speaking. If you told a CEO, hey, can you rephrase that? They don't get jumbled. They just go, oh, yes, I will rephrase that. If you say to somebody else, can you rephrase that? They go, did I say it wrong? Was I an idiot? I don't want to say this again. Oh, my God, this is a failure.
And what you just mentioned is kind of interesting. Like, when you start this process, especially in like the business world, or if you're working on a documentary, the first time you work with somebody, they might not understand how to perform. They might not get it. The second time, they'll understand more. The third time, they'll be ready to go. Right. They'll be like, okay, so I just show up, do this, you ask questions. I did no prep work. I'm ready to go. So it's one of those things that it does. You improve over time. The people you're speaking to improve over time. And I can say, like, I remember the first one I did. It was in an apple orchard, and it was a hot day. And I remember just feeling like I was stumbling over what question to ask next. I was trying to pay attention to him, but had thoughts in my head, and it was one of those things that was just the epitome of like thinking it's easy, but then realizing it's harder than it looks. And now, like, the level of prep work that I do in advance has gone down, but I'm definitely better because I'm confident and know what I'm doing. And it does feel good to get positive feedback from clients through the years, and to know that we can just step in and know exactly what we're looking for.
And to be honest with you, I never really thought about the art of the interview. I've been doing interviews for well over 15, 16 years now. It wasn't until I started this company with you that I saw other people doing interviews and some of their struggles that I realized, hey, maybe what we do is an art form, and there is an art to it. Case in point, I'm going to give you 2 things that are my pet peeves, and then we can round this up. Just for the crew members out there, because I think this is important. My crew has heard this many times over, but if you're in the middle of an interview and you're a DP or a PA or a boom controller, put the cell phones away. I find it the most distracting when one of our crew members is texting while the person is giving an interview, because it's distracting. It makes them feel like what they're saying isn't important and that they're not holding your attention. So that's one of my personal pet peeves. The other personal pet peeve of mine is, hey, listen, when you're doing the corporate world, if you're lucky enough to have a separate room with a video village and you have like their marketing team there to watch, that's cool. Most of the time, we're surrounded by 4 or 5 other people behind us. From the client side, I always feel like the piece of advice I'd give everybody is just make sure that whoever may interrupt and ask questions as a follow-up are behind you. That way, when they pipe in to ask questions, the person doing the interview doesn't look to the left or the right of you, and you lose contact with them. Because once you lose eye contact with that person, you probably lost them for the rest of the interview.
And be mindful of who's in the room, right? Like, there are some people you can put in a room that end up intimidating the people sitting on the stool, even if they're aware of it or not. So if your boss's boss is in the room and you're afraid of them, you're probably not going to perform as well on camera. So some of these things are tricky things to weigh, but like we can kind of spot them when they're happening and try to resolve them on the set.
Have you ever kicked anybody out of the room, Justin?
Probably not.
Yeah.
That's not. That's unfortunately not how I roll.
You can't start kicking people out. Although there are times where, I understand what you're saying. What I want to end this with is something that you say all the time, which I think is very prevalent to this conversation, which is, and you can comment on this, but it's not just asking questions to get them to say something. It's how they say it. That's very important. It's as
Which
important
is why
as
I never used to like paper edits. Like fortunately, like Rev has better, the different transcription tools have ways that you can see the video and the comment that you're saying. But
you're saying rev.com?
Yeah. I found paper edits to be somewhat useless because you might pull a great soundbite, but they said it horribly and it's not usable. So it gives you a fictitious thing in your head of like, oh, we have this great soundbite, but in fact, like they said something that you can't use it because it's flat.
And that goes back to how I wanted to end this is you had mentioned it earlier in this podcast, but you really, as an interviewer, it's not just about asking the questions. You have to pay attention and be cognizant of how they are saying it, because how many times have you asked the question, they've given you an answer, and you're like, that sounds great. That is the perfect soundbite. And you go back to the post-production and you listen to it, and it just doesn't sound the way you thought it was going to sound.
And then you're talking to an editor about like, no, they'd said this.
This is
and
what they
like,
said, yes.
But they didn't.
No.
Like,
I thought we were talking about a red car.
Yeah.
And he said, red car, I love it. But I thought it was a much better soundbite.
Yeah.
By being in the moment, by paying attention, by understanding what you're trying to get out of them, those are the most important things, because you want to make sure that you have what you need for post, because that's the hardest thing to do. Is this isn't like the movies where you can go back and do a reshoot. Now you could. Clients aren't going to like that most likely.
No, it's not always the best strategy. So, I mean, I think we're going to do another podcast that talks through ways to film interviews and other things around the interview. This is more around how do you, as the producer director, how do you prepare your interview? How do you get the best responses from the person you're speaking to? And the value of this is huge, whether you're making documentary work, whether you're making work for a corporate client, whether you work at a corporate client and you need to make blog posts, podcasts. Like, the art of interviewing goes way beyond video production. This is just one speck of how this can be used. I think when you do it well, I love interviews where I walk away from it feeling like I know something about this person that I just spoke to. Beyond them giving me sound bites that I need, I feel like I generally kind of know what type of person this is. And I love when after an interview I can say, okay, of the 10 people we interviewed today, this is someone that's worth exploring a little bit more, maybe doing a deeper profile on, because I can tell that they've got it. It's like the movie Angels in the Outfield.
Yes.
Where it's like, I can tell he's got it today. That's how it feels.
I also like the feeling, and I should say love the feeling, when you walk away. Not only did you explore people and their stories, but I think that I tell clients all the time, you and me potentially would be their next best hires, right? We've done our prep work. We know a lot about this subject. We know a lot about what we're talking about at the end of an interview, because for me, the interview is also, it's a dive deep into research, right? We're researching, we're pulling out the information. The worst thing that happens, though, from my end, is I start using my interview skills at parties, going out, just start interviewing people. I'll be talking to the cashier, and then like 5 minutes later, people are like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm just exploring the depths of
wrong places to use
wrong places to use the interviews." But yeah, I definitely think that there's definitely another podcast which would be interesting to talk about the interview styles, because the art of the interview changes per style. But we've explored many different styles, whether it's down the barrel of the camera or docu style, or just really cool different ways. We definitely should explore that as well.
Whether they're sitting on a stool, standing up, whether it's them out in the field and actually like doing something and you're talking to them as they're doing something. So there are just a lot of ways to conduct an interview, a lot of formats, and they change the result of what you're actually capturing on video.
Cool.
And all require different things. So we'll have more on that.
This has been the Video Jungle Podcast. Find your fascinating. A product of Animus Studios.